Hi everybody, welcome to Automotive. We are here to talk about the CANCAN, which is a can-in-can attack for bypassing security. A few words about myself. I'm in the cybersecurity world about 15 years. Eight of them are in the automotive industry, and six of them are in this company. Besides cybersecurity for automotive industry, I also dance to a slow swing, which is fun and irrelevant for our presentation. So let's move on. Don't look at the CANCAN, look at what's inside. This is from Pirkei Avot, and is similar to Don't Judge a Book by its cover. The relevance for this vulnerability will be apparent. So a bit about our agenda for today. We will start with talking about the CANBUS and CANFD protocols. We'll hear quick-ish because it is a bit long, and I hope that you stay with me. There is a TLDR at the end of CAN and FD, so even if you lose me, you can hang on to these slides. After we finish that, we have the CANCAN overview, which will contain the main idea behind CANCAN, the scenarios and use cases that will be used there. A bit of a technical how to use CANCAN, how to build such messages will also be explained. And then we will reach the setup and a few demos regarding this. And for finishing this presentation, I will go over different fixes for this issue. First things first, we are in a vehicle. A vehicle contains many things, including little computers. These computers are called ECUs, the electronic control units, which are needed mainly for two purposes. One is passing different signals, different information that one component has and the other needs, such as velocity, temperature, etc. Another thing that can be passed between components on this shared bus is certain protocols, such as diagnostic protocols used for both extracting some errors that occurred in the car. If you ever went to a garage and something was connected and the computer at the garage showed some issues, they use this protocol. It can also be used for updating firmware on different ECUs. Now, how does this shared bus actually work? Well, actually, this bus is shared in a way that every message that is sent gets to anyone, any component that sits and listens to this bus. So this kind of protocol is inherently susceptible for sniffing, but also for spoofing. There is no inbuilt security mechanism that knows who is the source and the destination of a specific message. So in this shown case, the rightmost component is the destination of a specific message, but every component on the bus actually gets this message. In an actual vehicle, there are usually multiple buses. These are separated both by functionality and also by levels of trust. So for instance, if a component is more critical and related to the driving or safety, it may be in a specific bus, but other buses, such as the entertainment, can be located on another bus. But even in such a case, some messages will still usually need to be passed between different buses. So a gateway, a special ECU, is usually connecting and sitting between all of these buses and will route different messages, usually based on their CAN ID, which represents the type of the message. We will get to what a CAN ID is in a few slides. So let's start talking about the CANBUS. CANBUS is a pretty old protocol used from 1986. This protocol, as I said before, contains CAN ID. This ID is replacing the entire concept of a source or a destination. Usually, in most cases, a specific ID will be sent by one specific source to one specific destination. This ID can be either 11 or 29 bits, depending on a specific other bit inside the sent message. And it is used for arbitration. Now, what is this arbitration? Let's say in a specific bus, two components will try to send a message at the same time. And these two messages are with different CAN IDs. So in this example, one is 234 and the other is 456. When sending them on the same time, the component sending the higher CAN ID will notice that a lower CAN ID is currently being sent and will cease sending, allowing the lower CAN ID to be sent successfully to the target. The higher CAN ID will do a retransmit and actually be sent later. So CAN ID is not only a type, but also has this prioritization property. How is this priority actually implemented behind the scenes? Let's talk a bit about the physical bus of a CAN bus. On a physical bus of CAN bus, the bits 0 and 1 correspond to a dominant bit and recessive bit. Dominant bit means that when sending this bit, the 0 bit, this is the value that will actually be on the bus. When sending a bit of 1 logical bit, actually this will be done by not doing anything. There is a pull-up register, a pull-up resistor, which will actually set the voltage by default to a high value. So if at the same time two components, one will try to set the value on the bus to 0, and the other will set it to 1, the actual value on the bus will be 0. So in this example, when the lower CAN ID is sent, the first 0 bit that is set on the bus will take precedence over the 1 bit sent by another component. So when the component sending the 1 bit will read back the value, it will see a 0 and stop transmitting. So that is how this protocol implements this prioritization. Also, a CANBUS message contains a CRC for recognizing that errors occurred on the bus. It supports up to 8 bytes of data. I'm going to stop here just to remind you, I am running over a lot of details here. In the end, there will be a TLDR reminding you what is important here, so don't worry. So again, we are supporting up to 8 bytes of data in this kind of message. There is a field called the DLC, which is the data length field, and will contain the value of 0 until 8. Any value higher than 8 will be handled as 8 bytes. When using a specific bus, all components know beforehand what the bitrate that is being used. So for example, a bus can use the bitrate of 500 kilobits per second. Resynchronization. As we previously mentioned, the only thing sent on the bus is these 0 or 1 bits. How are different components supposed to be synchronized regarding these sent bits? So this is based on a resynchronization that happens every time an edge of 1 to 0 occurs. So every bit that is sent can actually be separated to different segments. A synchronization segment, in which an edge is expected. A propagation segment, responsible for the time in which the signal takes to reach from one component to the other. And 2 segments, seg1 and seg2. The sample point will be between segment seg1 and seg2. Now, what happens when an edge arrives late is that our receiving node will see that the edge was received late. It can calculate the time between the expected edge and the actual incoming edge, add that to seg1, and cause the sample point to now be synchronized. On the other hand, if an edge arrives early, then seg2 can be shortened, causing the next sample point to be earlier. So this will allow two different components to be synchronized every time an edge arrives. And the last element regarding specifically CANBUS is the stuffing. In order to make sure that there is not too much time between different edges that are used for this resynchronization, there cannot be 6 consecutive values with the same value. Whenever that happens, another bit of the opposite value will be pushed into the bus. This bit is called a stuffing bit. So for example, if 5 consecutive zeros are being sent, then 1 bit is being pushed afterwards. If 5 ones and 4 zeros are being set, 1 zero is being stuffed, but now we have another sequence of 5 zeros. So another 1 is being stuffed. And actually, this is called the cascade effect. It can allow a sequence of 5 ones and then 4 zeros, 4 ones, 4 zeros, 4 ones to be converted to 5 ones, 5 zeros, 5 ones, 5 zeros. So this is the worst case of adding stuffing to a message. So we got to the TLDR. So I hope everybody can come back to me now when I talk about what is important regarding what I just said. So a CAN bus has a CAN ID, which is sort of the type of the message. CAN bus allows up to 8 bytes. There is this concept of resynchronization, which means that a sampling point might move if an edge arrives too early or too late. And there is a concept of stuffing that cannot allow us to send 6 consecutive bits of the same value. Let's move on to CANFD. Hopefully this will be a bit faster. CANFD was a newer protocol, which was born at 2012. It now allows up to 64 bytes of data, and the DLC, the same DLC field, is again used, but has a different meaning for any value above 8. Also supports a different CRC. If the regular CAN bus use a CRC of 15 bits, now depending on the length, up to 16 and from 16, a usage of 21 bits or 17 bits will be used for the CRC. And there is a possibility for a faster bitrate. Now, this is, I think, one of the most interesting properties of the CANFD. So let's talk a bit about this. The CANFD added a bit called BRS, bitrate switch. Now, when this switch is off, when the value of the BRS is 0, then the message is sent using the lower bitrate, exactly like CAN bus was. However, when the BRS is set to 1, from the bit right after BRS and until the end of the CRC field, all of these bits are sent using a higher bitrate. An example of such a higher bitrate is 2 megabits per second. Now, if we were to look at the bus using an oscillator or an oscilloscope or a logic analyzer, we will see that from this stage on, the bits are actually sent more squished together. Other fields that were added in the FD is a stuff counter, which is a counter of the stuff bits that were encountered up to this stage. And there is a new concept of fixed stuff bits. These are, again, bits that are used to make sure that edges are there. But if the regular stuff bits occurred every time a sequence of 5 consecutive bits were handled or were being sent, these are in specific offsets in the CRC field. So in the CRC field, as you can see, every 5th bit is a fixed stuff bit. So what is important to remember here? CANFD supports up to 64 bytes of data, and there is this possibility of a faster bitrate. So now, when all of us are experts on both CANFD and CANBUS, we can move on to what actually CANCAN is. When an FD message is sent, as we said, some of the bits are sent using the slow bit rate, but from the BRS, from the bit right after the BRS, bits are sent with a faster bit rate. Now, what happens if when these faster bits are sent, a slow bitrate sampling for some reason starts? So what happens if some slow bitrate sampler starts sampling in the middle of a sent message? Well, in this case, these fast sent bits may appear as other slow bits. And if these slow bits appear as a valid message, this means that this sampler, starting in the middle of a message, will actually see an encapsulated message instead of the sent message, the encapsulating message. So when will a sampler start sampling in the middle of a sent message? This probably should not occur very often. So we thought about different scenarios in which this may occur. One scenario is a wake-up scenario. When a unit starts for the first time, it will start sampling the bus and try to understand if currently the bus is quiet. It will count 11 recessive bits and only then start sampling a new message. So if a unit wakes up in the middle of a sent FD message, perhaps it will start sampling the message when the encapsulated message is being sent. Another option is a bus error. As we said, there is a CRC field which is used to see whether some errors occurred when sending the message. But what happens if an error, such as a bit flip, happened when sending a DLC? I will remind you that DLC is the length of the message, the number of bytes in the data field. So let's say a message of 64 bytes is being sent. This kind of message has all bits of the DLC, all 4 bits, set. If the first bit of the DLC is flipped, then it will look as a 7-byte message. So after sampling 7 bytes, the sampler will assume it reached the end of the first message and may start sampling a new message. A third scenario in which this may occur is a mixed network. This scenario specifically was not really checked because we did not encounter any real-life scenario in which this happens. But if it were to happen, a component that does not actually support FD, but is aware that FD exists, may stop sampling when it encounters an FD message and start sampling again when it thinks that the bus is quiet. So if an attacker or if an encapsulating message will be sent with enough supposedly slow bits that look recessive, the bus will seem quiet, and this component may start sampling the encapsulated message. Sorry. So some updates after the last time I presented this. 2 of the 3 scenarios actually are protected by the protocol itself. When waking up, or in a case of a mixed network, the way to judge whether or not the bus is quiet will be done both by counting 11 recessive bits, but this counter will be reset when any edge is encountered. So I will remind you that because of stuffing, even in this fast bits that are sent in the FD message, we must send both zeros and ones. So edges will occur there. Any such edge will reset the counter and not allow, in these 2 scenarios, a bus to appear quiet when it is not actually quiet. However, this may still be vulnerable even in these two scenarios. The two possibilities of this is, one, if edges, which are very short, are filtered. This is actually configurable, so in certain configurations, this may still work. Another case is when some implementation didn't actually adhere to the protocol. As we will see later, one specific component, we managed to prove that the wake-up scenario does work on it. So some implementations that do not adhere to the protocols do exist. So actually, why is this even interesting? Why do we care if a message can be parsed from the middle and be parsed as another valid message? So we will have a few security assumptions here regarding what is the situation that an attacker using this CANCAN attack will need to handle. The first assumption is that an attacker can send a specific message or a message with a specific CAN ID to a target. How did the attacker gain this ability? It may be by using some previous vulnerability to take control over a component, and maybe by just connecting to the physical CAN, such as the OBD. The second assumption, the attacker wants the target to receive a specific attacking CAN ID. For example, a diagnostic message with specific capabilities or functionality, or an incorrect or malicious signal. And the third assumption is the attacker, for some reason, cannot send this attacking message directly. Now, when are these assumptions actually valid? Two examples of these use cases are these. One is the gateway routing. As I presented in the beginning of this presentation, a gateway may base its decisions of routing on the CAN ID of the message. So in this case, an attacker attempting to send a malicious message will not be routed to a bus containing the target unit. However, the attacker may still be able to send another valid-looking message, which will be routed to the bus containing the target. So using CANCAN, maybe the target will actually see the encapsulated message, which is the attacking message, contained in a valid-looking message. A second case is an IDS or IPS system. IDS or IPS is intrusion detection or prevention systems. These systems will usually do some analysis of different messages that are sent. If this analysis is based on a CAN ID, then IDS or IPS that are not aware of the CANCAN attack will raise alarms or drop messages containing a malicious-looking message, but will not do so for a valid-looking message with an encapsulated attacking message. Okay, so we understood what CANBUS and CANFD are. We understood in rough lines what CANCAN is. Let's talk a bit about how a CANCAN message can actually be created. So when attempting to take a message and encapsulate it, we need some way of encoding the slow bits of this encapsulated message. So the straightforward way of doing so is for every slow bit of the encapsulated message, we will take a few fast bits from the encapsulating message and just use them. So for a sequence of 0, 1 slow bits, we will take 0, 0, 0, 0, 1, 1, 1, 1, assuming a ratio of 4 between the fast bit rate and the slow bit rate. This is a ratio that is used actually in the car industry. Now, the problem with this naive approach is that, for instance, in the case of two slow bits with the same value, we will attempt to encode them with 8 consecutive bits of the same value. as we said, we cannot do this because there is this stuffing problem. So after 5 consecutive bits, a value of the opposite value will be sent. So what we can actually do is use a more sophisticated encoding table. So in this table, for the first time we attempt to encode a bit, it will again be 4 times the bit sent with the fast bit rate. However, on the second time, we will send 1 bit of the opposite value and 3 bits of the value that we want to be sampled. I will remind you from talking about the resynchronization issue that the sampling point is usually somewhere between the 70 or 80% of the sent bit. So this will be sampling one of the 2 last bits sent here with the faster bit rate. The first bit, which is of the opposite value, we might be afraid that they will cause resynchronization issues because we are currently adding new edges. As we said, edges might cause resynchronization. But actually, there are resynchronization rules which we adhere to when doing this table. The rules are only a 1 to 0 edge counts, only if the value after the edge is different than the previous sample, we will do a resynchronization, and it can only happen once per bit. All of these cases are handled by these rules. So the only case where a resynchronization will happen is when sending here the first 0, which will cause a 1 to 0 edge. But this edge will be exactly between the 2 slow bits. So even if a resynchronization will occur, it will actually only keep the current synchronization. So using this encoding will not have any not stuffing and not resynchronization problems. A second issue here is an ACBit. I didn't talk about this when presenting the CANBUS and CANFD, but there is a specific bit in the message that is actually not sent by the sender of the message, but is sent by a receiver. For a sender to know that a sent message was received correctly, this bit is set to the dominant value by any receiving node. So if I were to send an encapsulated message and some node were to accept it, it would set the middle of the data section of a sent message to another value. And the sender will, again, sample whatever bits it is currently sending and will encounter a bus error and will stop sending. So we do not want this to happen. In order to prevent this, when encapsulating a message, we will actually already set the supposed ACK bit to 0. So any receiving node will, again, set it to 0, but it will not change the value of the sender, of the bit in the sender. So let's recap. How will we use this encoding to actually do an encapsulation? First thing first, we will prepend, we will take a message, and we will add idle bits before. As we said, in order for a message to be sampled, first any receiver will need to judge that the bus is currently quiet. So we'll need 11 recessive bits before a message. Then we will take any slow bit, including these prepended bits, and we will encode them using this fast bitrate encoding. Then we will do unstuffing. We will see wherever a stuff bit exists, and we will remove it in order to again get the original data that we will use to create a message. We will add some padding because we want the message to be in a specific length, and we will use this data to create the encapsulating message. So this entire process has some limits. Depending on the number of stuff bits in the encapsulated message, not all types of messages can actually be encapsulated. So for example, when encapsulating a base CANBUS, which is a CANBUS message with a CAN ID using only 11 bits. Then we can only use between 6 and 8 bytes of data for an and these are for every type of message. There are more fields, more or less fields in the extra data, extra bits that are sent in the message, and so they cause different limits on the number of data bytes that we can actually use when encapsulating. That's why we propose not only this base encapsulation using only this encoding, but also end encapsulation. So if in the original encapsulation that I just described, an attacker will only use the data section for all of the encoded bits, I also propose some way of utilizing the end bits, all of the CRC field and other fields in the encapsulating message, so that they actually coincide with the end bits of the encapsulated message. So in this case, we actually managed to raise the limits of the messages that we can use and encapsulate. It is more tricky, and I will not get into exactly how it is being handled, but just give you an idea of the problems here. There are certain limitations on the end of the data here, which may cause this message to be illegal or invalid. So not all data can be supported here. And also, because the CRC and stuff counter of the encapsulating message are now being set to a specific value depending on the encapsulated message, then we will also need to do some handling to make them correct in the encapsulating message. If anyone is interested to know how, please read the paper. So actually using this end encapsulation and the optimized version of the end encapsulation, we managed to raise the limits of the possible encapsulated messages. So we finished with the theoretical part of the presentation. So let's see a few examples or a few setups of how this can be proved and demonstrated. So let's first talk about the wake-up scenario. I will remind you, the wake-up scenario is a scenario in which a component wakes up when a message is currently being sent, and it will start sampling a new message in the middle of a message that is currently being sent. So for this setup, we used 3 components. One is an attacker, which will send the message again and again and again. Second is a victim, which will be restarted every second. And a third is a listener. The reason we use a listener is so that someone or some component will set the ACK bit of the attacking message. If we do not do this, then the sender, while the victim is being restarted, will do retransmission because it will encounter an error of no one receiving its message. So this is also true in a real life scenario in which a bus usually will contain more than 2 units, more than only the attacker and the target, and the other units will mark the ACK bit as valid.
One question.
Yes.
Any issue on the network will send ACK, even
Any-
if it's not the target of the message.
Yes, as I said in the one of the first slides, there is no concept of source or destination for a CANBUS message. Any component, any controller on the bus will receive any message sent on the bus, and when receiving it, the controller will set the ACK bit to dominant value. So how will this attack look? An attacker will send a message while the victim is restarting. If done in a specific time, the victim will receive the encapsulated message and be attacked. So this was successfully demonstrated using a Pecan USB Pro FD with a version 2.3.1, the specific version that we had on this unit. The probability of success was very close to the theoretical one that we assumed, and other components that we checked this on did not seem to respond. Any component that we restarted while sending this message did not seem to be vulnerable to this attack. As I said later, we found out that the reason for this is that the protocol itself tried to actually handle this situation. Also, newer versions of the CANCAN USM Pro FD, namely 3.2.0, are already resistant to this attack. The way this attack looks in real life, this is the controller that receives the message. And you can see here that the unit is being restarted. Here you can see the attacking message being sent, and this is the encapsulated message that was received a few times. Let's see this again. So, I'm not sure how to. Does anybody know how to zoom?
It's a movie.
Huh?
It is a movie. You cannot.
Yeah, it's a GIF file. So this was the wake-up scenario. A more interesting scenario is the bus error, because a bus error, supposedly the protocol is trying to handle the case of errors on the bus. Now, how was this checked? In this setup, we again had an attacker, but this time this attacker did bit banging. For those of you who are not familiar with what bit banging means, this means that bits are set directly on the bus. We do not go through a CAN or CANFD controller. We wrote code that set bits directly to the bus. Now, the reason why we did this is so that we can simulate a bit flip. We will send a valid message, and we'll only change one bit, the higher bit of the DLC field. How will this attack work? The attacker will send this bit flipped message to the victim, which will receive the encapsulated message. How can we check this on a real-life component? If the encapsulated message is one that would cause a component to send some response, we can wait for this response, and if we get it, we know that the component received the encapsulated message. So this was checked on various types of CANFD controllers. This included, again, Pecan, but also NXP and Renaissance and ST components. And in all of them, it was successfully and deterministically demonstrated. So this means that probably any real-life controller will be vulnerable to this attack. And it makes sense because this is part of the protocol. Any controller that implements the protocol correctly should be vulnerable to this attack. So let's see.
If you use plus, shift equals, should zoom in. You will have the arrows.
Okay, so here we can see in this part we will send in the original. I think it stopped looping because of this. But what we've seen here, we started by sending the original message. The original message was this, the 234, and we sent it again with the bit flip. And we sent it with the bit flip, the 123 message was received.
Escape to go back.
Let's try and click it. Maybe it will replay.
Escape to go back.
Okay. So I think zooming in will not cause it to play. So anyway, again, the original message is sent, and now the bit flip message is sent, which will we will see the encapsulated message. Okay, so we proved that this is an issue that actually affects real controllers. What can be done? How can we actually handle this attack? So the most straightforward and probably best way to handle this is to actually change the controllers. If, as we said, for the two scenarios that were prevented by the protocol, if when judging that the bus is currently quiet, we will do so with resetting the counter, this attack will not be possible. So if this were to be done even between messages, then the bus error scenario will also be blocked. So changing the protocol is one possible solution. Of course, it is a very costly solution and will take much time to do, because it will require changing the protocol and then developing controllers, checking them, and it is at least years until such a solution can be implemented. Another possible solution is implementing an IDS or IPS which is aware of the CANCAN issue. So these kind of IDS or IPS can do a deep packet inspection and try to simulate slow bitrate sampling in different points of a sent message, attempting to see any encapsulated message. Also, the scenarios that were shown were statistical, meaning that an attacker will probably send many attacking messages. So even if not every single message is actually parsed and checked, if every I don't know, 100, 1,000 messages is examined that way, it may be enough. Another solution is, of course, using other authentication layers. CANBUS is inherently susceptible to spoofing and sniffing attacks. Using higher levels that offer some authenticity or encryption to protect the data will also handle this issue. However, again, if even one message is susceptible and is not protected by this authenticity, then CANCAN can be used to sneak this message inside. That is all. Any questions? Yes.
Why didn't you use the bit banking for the first scenario?
For the recording, the question was, why didn't we use the bit begging for the first scenario? The answer is, first, that we did not have to. CANCAN is not requiring an attacker to connect physically to the bus. The entire concept of CANCAN is using valid messages in order to contain other valid messages. So using the wake-up scenario, we did not need to set bits in some invalid way. We wanted to send a valid message, which in case of a wake-up, will be parsed as another valid message. Yes?
Yeah, if there is an option to utilize that method of attack remotely, do I need to physically access the...
So the question was, is this method of attack done with some physical access, or can it be done remotely? The answer is, an attacker will need to send a CAN bus message on the target bus. In order to do that, it will need some access allowing him to send a CAN message. So maybe remotely, an attacker can attack and take control over a unit that does have some connection to the bus. And after that step, it can use this controlled unit to send messages. But obviously, just remotely without taking control over a system, it's not possible.
Were you able to demonstrate it on the ECU?
The question was, were we able to demonstrate this on a real ECU? The answer is yes. As I said, I checked it on many different controllers of many different manufacturers of CANFD, and in all of them, the bus error scenario worked. The wake-up scenario did not. It only worked on one that I've seen, only on the pecan in an old version.
Is this relevant for flex rate?
The question was, is this relevant for flex rate? I must admit that I'm not very familiar with flex rate.